Welcome to the China Memo. We make unbiased observations on structural trends. I'm your host, born in China, trained in Western finance. BYD executed a hard pivot in March 2022, terminating ICE production to focus exclusively on electrified platforms. At that point, most Western automotive analysis still treated Chinese EV makers as a domestic story. Companies propped up by state subsidies, operating inside a protected market, unlikely to compete seriously at the global level. The argument was straightforward. BYD received at least $3.7 billion in various forms of government support between 2010 and 2022. It benefited from procurement preferences, pilot city programs, and a consumer subsidy regime that effectively paid Chinese buyers to purchase domestic EVs rather than the foreign ones. Under that reading, BYD is a policy artifact. Remove the subsidies, open the market fully, and the company looks different. This episode is going to take that reading seriously, because it is not wrong, and then it is going to show where it stops being sufficient as an explanation for what BYD has actually become. By the first 8 months of 2024, BYD held 23% of the global EV market, more than double Tesla's shares over the same period, in over 100 countries, with a battery architecture that its competitors are still trying to replicate. The subsidy frame has reached its explanatory limit. We are now observing a structural competitive advantage that persists even as direct policy support fades. Before going further, a baseline. BYD, Build Your Dreams, was founded in 1995 as a rechargeable battery manufacturer in Shenzhen, not an automaker, a battery company. It moved into automobiles in 2003 by acquiring a small state-owned car manufacturer and spent several years as a relatively unremarkable player in the Chinese mass-market car segment. The strategic pivot came into 2 stages. First, BYD started applying its battery expertise to electric vehicles before most incumbent automakers took the category seriously. It built China's first NEV charging station in 2006. It joined the government's 10 cities, 1,000 vehicles pilot program in 2009. In Shenzhen, its home city, BYD's E6 taxis became the feasible proof of concept for urban electric mobility. Second, it retained vertical integration as a structural principle, rather than outsourcing components to reduce capital requirements. Today, BYD produces its own batteries, electric motors, power electronics, and some of its own semiconductors. In architectural terms, BYD operates as a full-stack energy company that happens to manufacture cars. That second decision, to integrate rather than outsource, is what makes BYD structurally unusual, and what the subsidy framing alone does not explain. The case that BYD is primarily a policy construct is substantial and deserves a full hearing. Start with the money. A German study cited by Electric documented at least $3.7 billion in various subsidies flowing into BYD between 2010 and 2022. Grants, preferential loans, land support, and direct purchase subsidies for its vehicles. That number likely undercounts total support, since not all Chinese industrial policy flows through transparent published channels. The market structure mattered as well. China's NEV subsidy program, which ran from roughly 2009 to 2022, effectively paid consumers to buy domestic electric vehicles. Foreign brands initially struggled to qualify for subsidies due to battery sourcing requirements that pointed buyers toward domestic manufacturers like BYD. The protection was not always explicit. It was often embedded in technical standards, procurement rules, and pilot city participation criteria that domestic companies were better positioned to meet. BYD's early customer base was not retail consumers choosing BYD over alternatives. It was municipal bus fleets, taxi operators under city contracts, and government-linked rental companies, all buyers that were to varying degrees steerable by local policy. Shenzhen's decision to electrify its entire bus fleet using BYD vehicles was not purely a market outcome. Foreign automakers faced a series of barriers: joint venture requirements, battery sourcing rules, type approval complexity that slowed the rollout in China while BYD was accumulating scale and production experience. So the counter-narrative has real content. BYD's early years was substantially shaped by a policy environment designed to produce exactly the kind of company BYD became. The $3.7 billion is not a rounding error. The protected market is not just a footnote. Here is where the subsidy framing starts to lose explanation power. In 2020, BYD introduced the Blade battery. This is worth spending time on because it is the clearest evidence that something beyond subsidy and scale was occurring inside the company. The Blade battery is a cell-to-pack design using lithium iron phosphate chemistry. It's a little bit mouthful. Let me break that down. Conventional EV battery packs are built in 3 layers: individual cells, grouped into modules, and modules assembled into a pack. The modules add weight, volume, and cost. They exist primarily to simplify manufacturing and provide structural support. BYD's Blade design removes the module layer entirely, arranging long, thin cells, the blades, directly into the pack structure. Think of it as the difference between shipping individual items packed in boxes that are then loaded into a container versus loading the individual items directly into the container with a purpose-built internal structure. You use the space more efficiently. The result is that space utilization in a pack increases by roughly 50% compared with conventional module-based designs. Energy density goes up. Cost per kilowatt-hour goes down. And because lithium iron phosphate chemistry is used rather than the higher energy nickel manganese cobalt NMC formulations that Tesla and most Western manufacturers have favored, thermal runaway, the failure mode that causes EV battery fires, is substantially less likely. Blade packs pass the nail penetration test, a severe stress test that many NMC-based packs fail. That combination, higher volumetric efficiency, lower cost, better thermal stability, and a longer cycle life, is not the output of a subsidy program. It is the output of a company that has been developing battery chemistry and manufacturing engineering for 25 years and applied that accumulated knowledge to a specific design problem. The vertical integration point compounds this. Because BYD controls its own battery production, it does not face the cell shortage constraints that hit other EV manufacturers when demand outpaced supply. When the global semiconductor shortage hit the automotive industry in 2021 and 2022, BYD's in-house semiconductor capability, limited but real, provided partial insulation. When cell prices spiked on lithium supply concerns, BYD's integrated structure allowed internal cost management that competitors without captive supply couldn't replicate. By 2023, BYD's NEV sales exceeded 3 million units. By 2024, more than 4.6 million, representing approximately 18% of global EV sales. And BYD remains one of the very few automakers in the world that is consistently profitable on electric vehicles, not subsidizing EVs with combustion engine margins while waiting for the economics to improve. None of that is fully explained by the $3.7 billion in cumulative subsidies over 12 years. Companies have received larger subsidies and produced less durable competitive positions. The subsidy provided the runway. What BYD built on that runway is a different question. BYD is now the clearest test case for whether China's cleantech industrial champions can compete in markets that are not protected by the same policy architecture that incubated them. The company operates in over 100 countries and sells in more than 70 markets. It has announced or begun construction on overseas factories in Hungary, Thailand, Brazil, and Mexico. The Atlantic Council's analysis of the Mexico investment is instructive. BYD's overseas plans are not primarily about accessing new consumers. They are about hedging against tariffs. A car manufactured in Mexico or Hungary is treated differently under US and EU trade rules than one shipped directly from Shenzhen. That strategy has a logic, but it also has limits. Building a factory is not the same as building a supply chain, a service network, a dealer relationship, or brand. European and North American consumers are not the same as municipal bus fleets guided by government procurement criteria. The competitive environment outside China involves legacy brands with established service infrastructure, consumer trust built over decades, and dealership networks that can deliver the post-sale relationship that determines whether a first-time buyer returns. The tariff environment is also hardening. The EU imposed additional duties on Chinese-made EVs in 2024, citing the scale of state support to Chinese manufacturers. The US has maintained and in some cases raised tariff barriers on Chinese EVs. The overseas factory footprint represents a strategic hedge against trade fragmentation, moving the risk from import duties to local operational execution. Beyond the factory floor, there is a branding architecture at play. BYD's domestic success was built on a dual architecture brand strategy, the Dynasty series for the traditional aspirational buyer, and the Ocean series for the younger digital native cohort. Scaling this globally requires more than just tech. It requires replicating this nuanced brand segmentation in cultures where Dynasty and Ocean may carry no historical or emotional weight. It is also worth noting that BYD is not doing particularly well yet outside China. Its brand awareness in Europe and North America remains relatively limited. Its software and in-car technology experience, which has become a core battleground in premium EV competition, is not yet rated alongside the leading players in those markets. And the after-sales service infrastructure, The thing that makes a car brand sticky rather than transactional is in early stages in most of its new markets. Step back from BYD the company for a moment and look at what it represents in the system. BYD is the clearest real-world example of what China's green tech industrial policy was trying to produce. A vertically integrated, domestically developed company that achieves global scale in the strategic technology sector, becomes profitable without indefinite subsidy dependence, and serves as a visible anchor for related supply chains in batteries, semiconductors, and power electronics. Whether that template is replicable is a live question. BYD benefited from a combination of factors that are not straightforwardly duplicable. A 25-year battery development history that predated the EV push. A founder, Wang Chuanfu, with a materials chemistry background, and an integration philosophy that was unconventional even within China, and the specific timing of the NEV push coinciding with a period when incumbent global automakers were slow to commit to electrification. The companies that are being positioned as the next BYDs in batteries, in humanoid robotics, in solar manufacturing may or may not replicate the trajectory. What BYD does establish is that the trajectory is possible. A company that started inside protected policy conditions can emerge with genuinely durable competitive capabilities. That is a data point with implications beyond BYD's own market share. It affects how seriously other governments take Chinese industrial policy as a competitive threat, how aggressively they design trade defenses, and how quickly they move to build their own protected incubation environments for strategic technology sectors. Here are the 3 markers to watch. First, overseas factory output versus exports from China. BYD's tariff hedging strategy only works if the overseas factories actually produce at scale and a competitive cost. Tracking the build-out pace in Hungary, Thailand, and Brazil, and the ratio of locally manufactured to China exported vehicles in each market, gives a read on whether the globalization strategy is operational or still primarily theoretical. Second, blade battery adoption outside BYD. BYD has begun licensing blade technology and selling cells to other manufacturers. If non-BYD automakers adopt the cell-to-pack architecture at scale, it validates the technology as a durable standard, rather than a proprietary edge. If adoption is limited, it suggests either that the competitors have found adequate alternatives or that BYD is managing licensing deliberately to preserve the moat. Either outcome is analytically informative. And third, profitability per vehicle as a function of geographic mix. BYD is profitable on EVs in China, where it has supply chain depth, brand recognition, and a service infrastructure built over decades. Its profitability profile in new overseas markets will be structurally different. Higher logistics costs, lower production volume per plant, more expensive dealer and service networks, and less pricing power relative to established local brands. Watching gross margin trends as the international mix increases tells you whether BYD's economics travel with the company or are specific to its home market. The subsidy case against BYD is not fabricated. $3.7 billion in documented support over 12 years. A protected domestic market, government-steered early customers, These are real inputs to what BYD became. But the subsidy case is not sufficient to explain a company that now holds 23% of the global EV market. Manufacturers and battery architecture competitors are still working to replicate, and is building overseas factories on 4 continents to hedge against the tariffs that the subsidy narrative helped produce. The more precise read is this: the policy environment provided the runway. The vertical integration philosophy, the battery chemistry depth, and the decision to keep manufacturing in-house rather than outsourcing. Those are what turned the runway into a competitive position that is now operating in markets where Chinese policy does not reach. Whether BYD's competitive position travels intact into European and North American consumer markets, where brand, software, and service matter differently than in fleet procurement, is the question that the next 3 to 5 years will likely answer. The data so far is incomplete. The market share figures are real. The brand and software gaps are also real. Both are worth tracking without collapsing the story into either the subsidy dismissal or the inevitable winner narrative. This has been the China Memo. Thank you for listening. Before I go, nothing in this episode constitutes investment advice or a recommendation to buy and sell any security. The China Memo is an analytical briefing. All figures are drawn from publicly available sources.